Welcome to the module on dysfunctional family roles. In this module, I'm going to be focusing on 6 of the most common family roles in families that are dealing with an addiction issue. There are other family roles as well, which I'm going to briefly review at the end of this module because I think that information may be helpful to you as well. But these 6 common roles are the most common, and so if you were to go to residential treatment or an intensive outpatient, these are the roles that are discussed most commonly in those settings. And they're coping mechanisms, okay? So they're roles that are adopted as a coping mechanism for the family member who's struggling to navigate the chaos that's created by the addiction. The chaos that is created by the addiction, not the person. Separating the addiction from the person. This is really an important distinction to be aware of, okay? So if you're somebody who's struggling with the addiction, you are not your addiction. Addiction takes over who you are. And if you are the family member who has a loved one struggling with addiction, recognizing that your loved one is not their addiction. They are not, the addiction completely takes over. It's a mental illness. Person becomes very, very sick, and it's not who they truly are. So I really like to emphasize that because there's a difference between the addiction and the person. And depending upon the age at which your addiction began or your loved one's addiction began, the person with the addiction may have never had the opportunity to grow into their true self. So, in other words, the only self that they've ever known is their addicted self, and this not their true self. And this I see happen with young people who come in and let's just take my son for an example. He first got sober at 19 years old. His addiction was like all he ever knew for like 4 years. And other young people who I see who've been in and out of treatment, you know, they come into treatment, they go out of treatment, they come in and been in and out. And the role of the addiction is all that they've ever known. And it's a role. It's absolutely a role. It is not who they are. And so when addiction occurs, it stunts any and all growth, especially mental, emotional, and spiritual growth, but it also can affect physical growth as well. Also, if you're someone or your loved one is someone who developed an addiction later in life, that experience can completely and generally does completely take over who they are. So the addiction takes over physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that person is no longer their true self. Their true self becomes overpowered and lost through the addiction. My recommendation is to absolutely, it's okay to hate the addiction, but not the person who's addicted. Trying to recognize that person, or you, if you're that person, is not the addiction. And so I've included in this module a YouTube video that I created that's all about this distinction of you are not your addiction. Your loved one is not their addiction. And I get very passionate about this. I get very emphatic about it because being someone who has experienced addiction, not who you are. That is not who they are. And understanding that it takes time. It takes a lot of time for that flip to take place. And I emphasize this, and I'm going to emphasize this throughout probably every single module, is that there is this difference between the addicted self and the true self. And that it's really critical to understand, because one of the first roles we're going to discuss is the addicted role, because it's a role. It's not who you are. It's not who your loved one is. And it's not representative of the true self. And it's actually a dysfunctional, maladaptive coping mechanism, just like all of the other roles that we're going to discuss in this module. And so perhaps you're already aware, of this concept, the addicted self versus the true self. Or perhaps you're struggling with the concept, especially I think if you're the family member. I think family members really have a hard time sometimes differentiating between the addicted self and the true self, because maybe that's all they've seen, the addicted self. But I believe that once you complete this course, that you are going to fully understand the critical nature of the power differential between the addicted self and the true self. And in this module, I'm asking you to look to identify the unhealthy, dysfunctional role you are playing within the family, whether that's the addicted role or even another role, because the roles often overlap. So if you're in the addiction role, you can also be playing another role within the family. Again, these are coping mechanisms. These are roles that we take on to cope with the chaos. So remember that as we're going through this, that there are other roles that you could be playing, not just the one particular role. And in using the word dysfunctional, all I mean is that it doesn't work. Okay. So dysfunctional is not functional, not working, but it often looks like it does. So in contrast to functional families, it's been suggested that dysfunctional families are a dictatorship that's run by its sickest member. And I can tell you that I believe this is absolutely the case, because I can absolutely look at my family of origin and my family over time and see how this has definitely been true for me. So it's a family that doesn't function in a healthy way. The family members are unable to find stability, and a dysfunctional family is characterized by a lack of boundaries. And so, of course, I share with you how to build healthy boundaries, important part of beginning to become a more healthy family unit. And so we usually think of alcoholism and drug addiction in the family as the primary cause of dysfunction, but it can also be caused by a variety of other different problems that the family faces. So a serious illness such as cancer, a death in the family, or mental illness. It can be caused by either an extramarital affair, religious abuse, or other abuses. And it can be caused by anything that rocks or stresses the family. Often dysfunction is intergenerational, which means it's passed on and it's learned from one generation to the next. Everything that I'm presenting to you in this course, so much of it is about unlearning what we've learned and starting to create these healthier patterns of behavior for ourselves. So much of it, like I said, is in the unlearning. So family roles, this is about taking an honest appraisal of yourself and where you and your family of origin fit into these roles. So remember, these roles develop in an effort to survive and have a sense of stability. But once you become aware of your role and the role of others within your family, this is going to help you to identify areas where you can change and start to again build these healthier and better boundaries for yourself. So the 6 common family roles in the addicted household that I'm going to cover are the addicted, the enabler, the hero, the mascot, the lost child, and the scapegoat. And maybe just by me presenting these to you, you may even already be starting to think about where you fall within the family. So let's look at the addicted individual within the family first. So the addicted individual within the family comes to live in a constant state of chaos. Okay? Life is completely unmanageable. The substance becomes their primary way of coping with life. I can absolutely attest to that. As the addiction progresses and takes over, the individual will generally become more and more desperate to supply their need for the substance. As a result, they manipulate those around them. They will lie and sometimes steal. They isolate and angrily blame others for their problems. It comes as no surprise that their actions create negative effects for the entire family. They can't seem to focus on anything other than the next drink or drug. Relationships suffer and can be destroyed during active addiction. Of course, anyone can fit this role. However, I'll provide the example of the father who is addicted to alcohol and as a result is very dependent and has repressed feelings of shame, fear, pain, guilt, and anger. He's out of touch with reality and hides behind walls of anger, denial, charm, projection, rigidity, blaming, perfectionism, and self-righteousness. He then medicates his feelings with some addictive substance. Not feeling is usually more important than being close to someone. Feelings behind this role are those of shame, guilt, and inadequacy. The behavior, of course, is addiction, dependence. Defense mechanism is denial. The payoff is a relief of emotional pain. The price, personal destruction. Next is the enabler. The chief enabler is usually the mother in the classic model of the alcoholic home, but it doesn't have to be. Characteristically, she is super responsible. She wears a masked smile, pretending that everything is fine, yet she has repressed feelings of hurt, anger, emptiness, guilt, and inadequacy. She feels stuck, overwhelmed, and powerless. She hides behind walls of martyrdom, seriousness, control, denial, people-pleasing, caretaking, protecting, rescuing, over-responsibility, self-blaming, hostility, low self-worth, physical illness, and fragility. Caretaking makes the enabler feel important and self-righteous. The family benefits because someone is taking responsibility for the structure and activities in the family. The goal of the enabler is to smooth things over within the family. Again, despite the example of the mother, an enabler can be anyone, spouse, parent, child, or sibling. In their effort to protect the family, the enabler may even convince themselves that the alcohol or other drug isn't a problem. They often will make excuses for their loved one's behavior, deny. This is a classic characteristic of the enabler as well as the addicted. The feelings behind the enabler are anger and helplessness. The behavior, worry and overprotection or lashing out in anger. Their defense mechanism is avoidance. The payoff is peace, albeit temporarily. The price is self-deception and perpetuation of the addiction. Next is the family hero. The family hero is usually the firstborn child. He or she is usually super responsible and not only takes responsibility off mom's shoulders, but also does the best to make good grades, make the team, work the extra job, whatever it takes to make the family look good. The hero provides a sense of worth for the family. The hero usually takes on a lot of the responsibility that the enabler cannot fulfill because they're busy taking care of the addicted individual. The hero usually has repressed feelings of guilt, inadequacy, loneliness, confusion, anger, and hurt. They'll hide behind walls of trying to be someone special. people-pleasing, helpful, approval-seeking, overachieving, intellectualizing, and being the little parent. They are compulsive and driven and usually become workaholics. It's not uncommon for the hero to become addicted later in life or suffer other health issues due to their stress. The feeling behind the family hero is false guilt. The behavior, overachievement. The defense mechanism is obsessive, compulsive, and rigid behavior. The payoff is positive attention and increased self-esteem. The price is workaholic and burnout. Next is the mascot in the family. The mascot is usually the youngest. They provide the comic relief for the family, always trying to deflect the stress of the situation by supplying humor. They're desperate for the approval of others, but also seen by the family as vulnerable and fragile. Providing comic relief is the mascot's defense mechanism against feeling pain and fear themselves. They have repressed feelings of being crazy, being scared, high anxiety, hurt, loneliness, confusion, and pain. Mascots often grow up to self-medicate themselves, perpetuating the cycle of addiction. For the mascot, the feeling is fear of catastrophe. The behavior, joking, clowning, overactive, excessively helpful. The defense mechanism is diversion, and the payoff is relief of fear. The price, immaturity. Next is the lost child. The lost child is usually a role taken on by the middle or the youngest child. They're generally sweet, shy, withdrawn, and sometimes thought of as invisible to the rest of the family. This is the child that the family doesn't have to worry about because they offer the family relief and stability. They won't rock the boat and tend to stay in their own little fantasy world as a result. They can be very manipulative and have trouble making decisions, but they can also be very creative. They will have repressed feelings of being ignored, confusion, hurt, inadequacy, unimportance, and anger. They don't seek or get a lot of attention from other family members, especially when alcoholism or other addiction is present within the family. The lost children hide behind walls of being quiet, withdrawn, and invisible. They'll be a loner, dreamer, super independent, and avoid stressful situations. This role can also manifest with issues such as asthma, bedwetting, eating disorders, confused sexual identity, and sometimes promiscuous behavior. For the lost child, there's a feeling of loneliness, and the behavior is passive behavior, personal camouflage. Their defense mechanism is retreating. The payoff is they escape. The price is social isolation. Next is the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the one person who gets blamed for the whole family's problems. This role tends to be taken on by the second oldest child. He or she offers the family a sense of purpose by providing someone else to blame. They voice the family's collective anger while shielding the addicted parent from a lot of blame and resentment. When scapegoats get older, males tend to act out in violence, while females often run away or participate in promiscuous sex. Scapegoats are also often the addicted person themselves. When the scapegoat is the addicted person and attempting to recover from their addiction, sometimes the family will resist allowing the scapegoat to be released from their role as the scapegoat within the family. This can create issues with chronic relapse as the family continues to maintain the role by doing things like bringing up the past mistakes of the scapegoat or continuing to blame the scapegoat for everything wrong with the family, even their own unhappiness, in an effort to maintain the family pecking order. The scapegoat feels damaged and inferior. The behavior, delinquent, rebellious. The defense mechanism is substitution. The payoff is negative attention and acceptance. The price, rejection and alienation, injury and permanent scars. Now that you've completed this section of the family roles and addiction module, identifying your role within the family will help you to begin to change. Review the family roles PDF for additional information on family roles, and be sure to complete the family roles worksheet. The healthier the family, the less these roles are written in cement. The more dysfunctional, the more difficult it is to get out of these roles. The goal is to identify your own behavior, thoughts, and feelings as part of the role, and then take action to step out of the role. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few other dysfunctional family roles. Well, several here you'll see are listed, but I'm just going to mention these briefly and give you just a very brief summary of what they are, because a lot of them actually you'll find crossover with other of the 6 that have already been mentioned, in particular the addiction role. So as I go through these and I describe them briefly, you'll be able to understand what I mean. So let's start with, well, first I'll tell you, you can obviously see here if you're watching this on the PowerPoint along with me, not so if you're just listening to this on the audio, but we have here the gooder, the writer, the driver, the controller, the superior, the victim, the inadequate, and the excitement seeker. So let me just go through these very briefly and describe what they are, although I think it could be perhaps easy to guess based upon the description, but let's just start here with the gooder. So the gooder is an individual who must be gooder than others, so that they may actually look down on others who are less good than they are. Often the gooder comes in the form of moral superiority or self-righteousness, and women more often than men occupy this position as the gooder. And as children, gooders often do what they're told, and they are regarded by their parents as the ideal children. Yet being more good than others is usually more important to them than being close to someone. So they're often actually seen by others as, having it all together, and they actually make ideal employees. The problems begin with the gooder when they start to crank up the moral high ground, and then those around them realize that they're being put down. And then we have the writer. So the writer attempts to exert power over others by always being right. They consistently judge the right and wrong in every situation around themselves. And this role is, you can tell obviously is closely related to the gooder, but it differs in that the writer will tell you that you're wrong, and the gooder will tell you that they're gooder than you. So the writer is always right, and the gooder is always better. So the writer actually has intense feelings of having to be in control, which makes it very overlapping, I think, with the addicted. They have to be right, they have to be superior, and they're constantly on guard so that they will never be wrong. In fact, in the face of any evidence that they're wrong, they will always be able to perform some type of maneuver or come up with some reason so that they aren't wrong. And being right is usually more important to them than being close to someone. This role is usually filled by males, often those who are firstborn, or the later born male that's struggling to catch up. So the writer represses feelings of insecurity, insufficiency, and a sense of worthlessness, and often suffers from the imposter syndrome. What you may see on the outside is lots of micromanagement of others, criticism, suggestions, arrogance, self-righteousness, competence at the expense of relationships. So usually this role is the highly competitive person, and they have little use for cooperation. Now the driver is very busy in their pursuit of something. Okay, so they're over ambitious, and their over ambition is a cover for feelings of inadequacy, that they really feel like they're nothing. So they're constantly going, and will work long hours at the expense of themselves and others in order to reach their goals. The critical point in understanding this role is that there's never an end point with the driver. The driver just keeps the dynamic going, coming up with more and more projects to accomplish, more money to make, etc. So the key word in understanding the driver is relentless, or insatiable. And as such, it's never enough, and therefore the driver only has brief moments of contentment and satisfaction. They're usually uncomfortable with contentment and need to be doing something to keep away from their feelings that they are nothing. So the driver is actually medicating away from this fear by always being busy. And so doing things is usually more important to them than being close in a relationship. The controller. So the controller continues to strive for perfection through orderliness, intellect, and or rightness. So they don't like what they can't manage, such as spontaneity, emotional expression, and surprises. They fear feelings since they may take them out of control. They have to be in control at all times, and so they use logic and the continual application of scientific method to handle all of life's tasks. They feel powerless in situations where intellectual expression is not the order of the day, and they may exert excessive control over themselves, but this role often extends to working hard to control others. Being in control is more important than being close in a relationship. And they're usually repressing fears of not being in control and being inadequate. So sentences for this role might be, I'm only okay when things are going exactly the way that I think that they should, or I'm only okay when I'm in control of things and people in my life, or people should act the way that I think they should act. And again, this is another one that is absolutely an overlap with the addicted. And then you have the superior. So the superior manages people and the environment so that they're always number one. And if they can't be number one in socially acceptable ways, then they'll resort to being number one in antisocial or asocial ways. So I see this quite often with people who come into treatment and they're in this competition for who's the worst, who's like the bigger addict, like who has had the most relapses, who has overdosed the most times, who's done the most extreme negative behavior. So they're in this competition to be the best of the worst. And in the interaction with parents, the superior child may know more things and be better at certain activities, and at times may actually correct their superiors. So anybody who's in this role of parental or this superior role. So they're usually firstborn children, but of course any of these where it says like firstborn or youngest or whatever, these are just like typical but not always. And they're extremely hard to be around because they're very overbearing and threatening sometimes. So they can actually pay a very high price for this type of thought process and usually have a lot of trouble building relationships due to their need to be superior. So not only is it overwhelming for them, but it's also overwhelming for anyone around them. And being a superior is more important to them than being close in a relationship. And when others are around someone who's in this role, generally they'll feel inferior or threatened in some way, because safety is usually minimal, whether that's, mental, emotional, or physical safety. And then moving on to the victim, okay? You'll see a pattern here that a lot of these are overlapping the addicted role. And just something to really, again, this is all about awareness. It's bringing to awareness, like, where do you fall in to these different roles, and how can you start to break out of the roles and start to heal from the dysfunction of these roles. So the victim suffers in superior ways, okay? So it seems that they always have something wrong with them, okay? There's always something negative going on in their lives, and they seem to have more problems than anyone else, and they often spend a majority of their time talking about their misfortune. And this role can actually manifest with physical symptoms, but is not limited to that. And you may find victim type people who are in the victim role talking about how put upon they are by being in certain relationships, and how other people are uncaring and selfish and superior, and they'll consistently complain about how bad their situation is. And they're actually slow to respond to opportunities to change. So this is the type of person where I've worked with this type of person, because it's very common for the addicted to come in as the victim, right? And it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. And the victim, though, somebody who's really like steeped in that victim role, when you present them with solutions and opportunities to change, they'll often like give you every excuse in the book as to why they can't do that. They're very vested and in their role as the victim. And being down and out is usually more important to them than being close. This is actually how they get close. But overall, it doesn't really work very well, because others who initially will get sucked in and feel pity for them will just get exhausted at how much work it is to be in a relationship with someone who's a victim. And then moving on to the inadequate. So the inadequate spends lots of time showing you that they can't do things, okay? They avoid responsibility, and they avoid responsibilities by displaying their inability to do whatever it is, okay? So whether it's clumsiness, awkwardness, or failure, they exert power over others sometimes when they step in and rescue them or take over their responsibilities, meaning that people will come in, they're exerting their power over others by getting others to step in and take over for the responsibilities that they are avoiding. And it can be very aggravating, okay, when this works. And if you're an enabler and you're paired up with an inadequate, I mean, that's like a super dysfunctional combination. So, being around a person in this role can be particularly annoying also, if you're not a hero or an enabler. Like if you're a hero or an enabler, you're going to be definitely attracted to the inadequate. But in reality, you're just adding more dysfunction. So the inadequate uses their inability to do life's tasks, to perform life's tasks, as a way to stay away from intimacy. So being inadequate allows them all kinds of connections with others as people step in to help them. But then what happens is people wind up getting angry with them. So all of those interactions wind up reinforcing this dysfunctional dynamic. And then lastly, we have the excitement seeker. And this is definitely someone who easily, as you'll understand, become the addicted. So the excitement seeker pursues the chaotic and adventurous lifestyle, and they avoid responsibilities. They don't like daily routine. For excitement seekers, the goal is always the same. It's always to find something stimulating, and they don't like anything that's dull, and they're looking for fun and excitement and entertainment constantly, and they don't care even if it's dangerous. Sometimes the more dangerous the better. So this person actually uses excitement to distance themselves from the day-to-day maintenance of relationships. And so danger, and when you think about like this type of role, it's easy, I think, to understand how this person can easily become the addicted, because they're more likely to be experimenting with dangerous substances, and we who are in relationship with the excitement seeker, we end up feeling worried about them, or even maybe inadequate in ourselves as we respond to the chaos and excitement in their life. This role is usually one that scares others, and unless you're doing the chaos and the dangerous, exciting, perhaps like activity with that person, they may seem distant and aloof, because that's the only way that they can connect. Those are the only type of people that they can connect with. So here you have some more roles that perhaps you can identify with. And again, the goal of this is to raise your awareness, to create an awareness of where you fall in those roles. And so going back to the module and looking at what I have there for you to help you to better understand your role and to start to heal from your role, to start to break out, so to speak, of that role. So I have the family roles worksheet, okay, and then there's also family self-care. There's a list of different family self-care options that are from the standpoint of emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, just a whole bunch of suggestions on what you can do with your family members to start to focus on self-care for the entire family. And finally, the last part of this module covers something called the 4 horsemen. So this is where I talk about the unhealthy communication versus healthy communication. And the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are 4 communication styles identified by Doctors John and Julie Gottman. So for those of you who are watching this video along with the audio, you'll see the photograph there on the screen is of Doctors John and Julie Gottman. They are relationship experts who have dedicated their life's work to studying and researching relationships, and as a result of their research, they claim to be able to identify within 90% accuracy whether couples will divorce or not, based upon their communication styles. And why this is so important, I believe, to be a part of this whole course is because when you're dealing with addiction issues, relationships become very strained and communication breaks down and becomes very dysfunctional. So generally there's a lot of these behaviors that we're going to talk about that are a part of this dysfunctional pattern of communication. So again, it's bringing your awareness to these relationship killers, their behaviors that actually contribute to the breakdown in a relationship. And that's any relationship. It's not just couples, but it's, friends, it's coworkers, it's other family members, it's children, it's whoever that you're communicating with. These are behaviors that will break down and destroy a relationship. And so I'm going to provide you with that information and with the antidote that you will hopefully find beneficial. And this is just a very small portion of the research information from the Gottman. So I highly recommend going and checking out their website. It's the Gottman Institute, I believe, .com. And there's a whole bunch of information on their website that you may find beneficial. But this information in particular, the 4 behaviors, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I believe is really critical when it comes to healing in a family that is facing addiction, and going from this unhealthy, dysfunctional behavior to much more healthy communication styles. So definitely take advantage of that, check that out, and I will join you again in the next part of this module. See you then.